And there's whole stories about pink elephants and all that because people see them while hallucinating. So if Golden Freddy is really just a hallucination, what would this mean for the series, and is it even possible? Well, that's what we're exploring today. Let's do it. Alright, first things first, could Golden Freddy be a pure hallucination, and could that really make any sense? I mean, he seems to cause hallucinations for us, but is that him controlling them, or are they just appearing alongside him? Well, by definition, hallucinations are an experience involving the apparent perception of something not present. So they're sensory experiences that appear real but are created by your mind. They can affect all 5 of your senses as well, not just sight, and for example, you might hear a voice that no one else can hear in the room, or you can see an image that isn't real, or maybe even feel the texture of something that isn't actually there. I remember that as a kid once I either was dreaming or hallucinated my basement being filled with boulders that I had to clean out. I don't know why I thought it was my job, but that kind of explains a lot now. My parents didn't see them though, and then just kept telling me to go to bed. They thought I was doing a bit or something, but this definitely explains a lot. Hallucinations though may be caused by mental illness, the side effect of medications, or physical illnesses like epilepsy or alcohol use. Not getting enough sleep can also lead to hallucinations. You may be more prone to hallucinations if you haven't slept in multiple days or didn't get enough sleep over longer periods of time, and it's also possible to experience hallucinations right before falling asleep, known as hypnagogic hallucinations, or right before waking up from sleep, known as hypnopompic hallucinations, which is why sometimes you may hear a voice or something that sounds like a voice while you're dozing off. But it's also not just limited to sleep. High fevers, migraines, social isolation, seizures, terminal illness, and high levels of stress can all also cause hallucinations. And honestly, based on the first game alone, I can see why we would have high levels of stress and probably be sleep deprived. I mean, our shift is from 12 to 6 AM, and that's only the part that we actually get to play, and I'm sure the working environment is pretty awful, and we're alone the whole time, which not only increases the stress, but the feelings of social isolation as well. And that's only within the first game. If we want to talk about the series as a whole, we play as Michael Afton in basically every game, with the exception of a few. So we can use this to kind of understand what's really going on. In the cutscenes to Sister Location, we learn that Michael was used as a vessel to help Ennard and whoever was inside of Ennard to escape the underground facility that's the main setting for that game. However, in the process, we end up becoming purple from all the bruising, because you know, metal parts are moving inside of us, and the neighborhood we live in ends up becoming afraid of us. See the "you won't die" scene for proof of that one, because everyone is hiding behind their homes as we walk down the street and then eventually puke Ennard out. They start off loving us, waving and smiling, but eventually become terrified and actively avoid us. If that's not gonna start the feeling of social isolation, I don't know what is. And I know what is. And we know that the original games have to come after these events because we're not only sent here by our father, who would have a tough time doing this trapped in a secret room, but also because of the cited reasons for being fired at the end of the original games. Odor is always listed, meaning that we've definitely been through some rough patches. And it's also worth noting that in Sister Location, where the stress, social isolation, and probably the sleep deprivation begin, Golden Freddy doesn't appear as an animatronic, but instead as a reference in the custom night menu, which can't really be considered canon, because in the actual story of the games you wouldn't be able to customize things. So Golden Freddy only starts showing up after Michael goes through extreme trauma, and seems to only be seen by Michael. Golden Freddy doesn't show up anywhere in promotional material for any of the restaurants, even before the Bite of 87, since him causing the Bite of 87 could be considered the reason why they stopped promoting him. But even in FNAF 2, which is just before the Bite of 87, since it may even take place during the events of that week, we don't see any art for the new Golden Freddy. While he does appear in the post-Night 3 cutscene, these are also referred to as the end of night hallucinations, meaning that they obviously aren't real. But also, it's an interesting point of contention. Here you would think that the theory would start to fall apart because, well, it's a hallucination, yes. At this point in the game, we're playing as Jeremy Fitzgerald, right? And while yes, during the main 5 nights we play as Jeremy, more on that later, that doesn't really mean that these hallucinations have to be his. Think about how the hallucinations are being presented, okay? They're the location from the first game, a game where we know we play as Michael Afton. Much like how Michael was part robot after his Sister Location fiasco, and we're inside the Freddy animatronics specifically, like how Michael would associate the character with the one who ended up killing his brother. And Golden Freddy shows up as another hallucination on top of that. These hallucinations are clearly meant to show us how Michael is figuring out what to do next. And not only are they showing the next location location that he would go to, they're also what brings him to the FNAF 2 location. Notice how he sees the puppet after night 4 in game, and then we don't really get another end night cutscene, simply because by night 6 we're actually playing as Mike. Sure, we get a check that says that Jeremy worked overtime, but really? Making or even letting an employee work overtime after one of your animatronics removed his frontal lobe? Yeah, no, that check is cleverly disguised hush money from an already shady company. Michael gets there on night 6 and takes over, only to get fired shortly thereafter. On the pink slip it says on the first day, really? But that seems to be one of those I think thou doth protest too much kind of things. Like, why do you feel the need to point that out on this pink slip? The notes section is for reasoning behind the firing and explanations, especially in a legal sense, so those who get fired can't really try and file wrongful termination suits, or at least if they do, they won't really have much legs. We also know that Fritz Smith is Michael Afton using an alias since he gets fired for the same reasons Michael does in the first game. The logical extension of that being that they're the same person, who had to change their name again when they applied to the next place because, you know, the company would have a record of Fritz Smith being fired. And considering how Fritz is one of the missing children's names, yeah, it's meant to be a fake name. Nobody other than Mike seemingly can see Golden Freddy, and whenever we do see him, it's never operational, and it's never in a tangible sense. In all forms, Golden Freddy is slumped over, there's no light in his eyes, and he's always in our office. We don't see him on a camera at any point, so where the hell on earth could he have come from if he is using supernatural abilities to move himself? Some explain this in the first game by saying that he was hiding out in the kitchen since the camera wasn't working, but in FNAF 2, we don't have any cameras that aren't functional, so where on earth could he have come from? It doesn't make sense even with the FNAF universe logic. Hell, we even see Shadow Freddy on the cameras, but not Golden Freddy. Huh. Weird. Speaking of his weird abilities, what's with the whole crashing us to the desktop thing? Every other animatronic sends us to the main menu, but Golden Freddy sends us to our desktop. That's a very odd detail that I don't think anyone is really questioning, but it certainly seems to indicate that there is something special about this character. And I don't think that it's that they're just angrier than the other ones, because that wouldn't really change anything. I think it's more symbolic than that. You see, the only other character that when killing us crashes us to our desktop is Nightmare from FNAF 4, and that is not a coincidence. FNAF 4 is where we see the inciting moment that starts all of this trauma for Michael, where he feels guilty for getting his brother killed despite it not really being his fault. Sure, he put his brother's head in the animatronic mouth, but William is the one who made the mouth intentionally superpowered. When I've said this in the past, in previous videos, at one point someone used the analogy of if someone puts your hand under a hydraulic press and then your hand is crushed, it's not the person who made the hydraulic press's fault. And you know what? You're right, that's true. However, if that hydraulic press was designed to stop before it reached the hand, or it wasn't supposed to have enough power to actually crush a hand, then the manufacturer who gave it too much power or messed it up, it's them at fault. Or I guess technically a better analogy would be if your car's airbags don't deploy during an accident, since that's more realistic than a hydraulic press stopping. In a settlement reached following mediation, attorneys Alan Feldman, Daniel Mann, and Edward Goldis obtained a multi-million-dollar recovery on behalf of a teenage girl who suffered catastrophic brain injuries in a car accident. Her car slid off the road during a rainstorm and struck a tree broadside, and the head curtain airbags and the chest and thorax airbags in the vehicle failed to deploy during the accident. They could prove that if the car had been manufactured correctly, the girl wouldn't have suffered any injuries, and thus the company settled instead of taking it to court. The same principle applies here. Had this not have been William's own child, if the family who lost their kids sued William, he would have been cleaned out. But of course, Michael didn't know that it wasn't his fault at the time. He learned that after Sister Location, which sets him on his journey. But going back to the connection between Golden Freddy and Nightmare, they're the only two animatronics that crashes to the desktop. And while with Golden Freddy that may not make much sense, with Nightmare having the same ability, it sets a baseline for what's really going on when this happens. Nightmare in FNAF 4 is representative of death. He's the dark shadow that's coming after Crying Child during his coma in the hospital after the bite of 83. Notice how Nightmare is a shadow version of Nightmare Fredbear, Fredbear being the animatronic that he would be most afraid of, because you know, it's the one that crushed him. And his Ultimate Custom Night voice lines support this idea. Quote, "I am here to claim what is left of you. You will not be spared, you will not be saved, and I am your wickedness made of flesh. All of these are indicators that Nightmare is meant to be death, especially in FNAF 4. And when Nightmare gets us, we crash to the desktop. We truly die. Not like when the other animatronics get us and we go back to the main menu. This time around, we're actually jump scared to death. The same must be the case for Golden Freddy, and considering how Nightmare is in essence also a hallucination, it would make sense for Golden Freddy to be able to jump scare us to death as well. A death that doesn't involve violence, and instead your heart giving out due to fear, hence the desktop crash. Golden Freddy being a hallucination would not only explain a lot, but it would also help clear things up. Golden Freddy being a real animatronic allows for Cassidy to be the one you should not have killed, since she can possess William without us having to worry about who's in the suit. The "It's me" line also makes sense now, since it would be referring to the animatronic that killed Mike's brother, or it could even be Mike assuming that Crying Child went on to possess the Fredbear animatronic because Mike knows that Elizabeth is possessing Baby, and it makes sense why we can't see Golden Freddy on the cameras, why he's never advertised, but also why he would be haunting William in Ultimate Custom Night, since William would also see Golden Freddy as the one who took his son. Well, at least if it is William in Ultimate Custom Night, since with this revelation now, it could be Mike. Cassidy could still be possessing William, but someone else may be possessing Michael, causing him to suffer since he blames his big brother for his death. Michael being the Ultimate Custom Night player explains why we would still see Golden Freddy in the final cutscene, it makes sense with the dialogue of the Ultimate Custom Night death screens, and it explains why Spring and Scrap Trap are there, because why would William be haunting himself? He doesn't seem to regret anything he's done. Michael being possessed by Crying Child explains why he knows what Nightmare Fredbear looks like, since he draws it in the survival logbook, and it explains why Cassidy and Crying Child could communicate in that book. Not because they share an animatronic, but because they share a purpose. To punish those who did them wrong, or I guess to punish those they consider the causes for their death. And then it allows for Michael to be possessing Glamrock Freddy for his redemption, because Crying Child was keeping him alive through FNAF 6's fire. FNAF 6 was supposed to be the end of the Afton story, okay? That's what Henry sets out to do in this game. That's the whole point of the game. Make sure that nobody remembered what happened there, despite the parents of the victims definitely remembering. However, this dumb figured that the first fire didn't work, so you know what, let's try it again. And in fact, he was so confident in this plan for whatever goddamn reason that he actually lets himself die in this process to leave nobody remembering what happened. But like I said, dude, even if Henry and William are dead and their kids, okay, the parents of the victims still remember what happened. And as we learn in Security Breach, there are other parents who remember it too. Because there's duffelbags citing the 9 missing children from the Pizzaplex as happening, quote, again. If Henry had stuck around to see if the job was really done, like around a maybe like Hearthstone or I don't know, literally anything else, maybe William wouldn't have been able to possess Vanny and then come back yet again to wreak havoc. The Pizzaplex missing children are a direct result of Henry just being a moron, and you can't tell me any different, okay? He should have lit the place up, smashed everything that survived, and then maybe he could have offed himself, but make sure the job's done first. God damn it, dude. Like, maybe even wait a few years to make sure that it's done, especially when this hasn't worked multiple times before. But you know what? Therein lies the question. Most of Henry's issues come from him opening the restaurants again and again. He even licenses the rights to people who make the FNAF 3 location possible, but after FNAF 6, how could Fazbear's reopen as the Pizzaplex, especially after both Henry and William are considered dead? Well, typically the next of kin would be considered the children or spouse of the deceased, but we know that both Henry and William have no kids, well, that survived, and at the very least that William has no wife. So assuming Henry's wife isn't in the picture as well, what could have happened to the Fazbear rights and intellectual property? Well, as I said in a reply to Aurelia's comment, if the deceased person has no children, the next of kin will move to the parents. After this point, the next of kin includes collateral heirs, or siblings of the deceased. Collateral heirs can also refer to nieces and nephews. So in essence, what that would entail would be giving the IP to the parents of William and or Henry, most likely Henry because William would have probably been declared dead before this after being missing for 30 years come FNAF 3, but if their parents also weren't in the picture, which would be understandable since like in FNAF 6 Henry would be like 60 at like the youngest, so his parents are most likely dead at that point, let's be real. So then we'd have to think about any siblings Henry may have, and it is certainly possible in the game story since thanks to the Silver Eyes we actually got confirmation that Henry has a sister named Jenny. Jenny Emily, otherwise known as Aunt Jen, is a character in the novel The Silver Eyes, The Twisted Ones, and The Fourth Closet. Being the sister of Henry Emily, Charlotte is her niece. After the passing of Charlie's father, Charlie was actually taken and cared for by Aunt Jen. However, you may think that this is all solved. It's not, because there's one caveat. Aunt Jen was killed by Circus Baby as she was impersonating Charlie in The Fourth Closet. Spoiler alert, but I mean, even I haven't read the books, so I don't think you'll care at this point. Everyone who's going to read the books has read them, so. And seemingly, Aunt Jen didn't really have any children of her own, so unless there's some random extra brother or sister out there that we haven't heard about, Henry has no living relative. So what happens after that? Like, if there's no actual family? Well, in the event that the court cannot determine who your next of kin is, guess what? Oh yeah, everything you've worked your whole life for becomes property of the state. Yeah. And with Utah typically being a red state, you best believe they'll be selling that IP to whoever wants to pay enough to actually reopen Fazbear Entertainment. This also would explain why William keeps getting away with everything, because I'm guessing, especially in this exaggerated form of story, the police must have been pretty easy to bribe. So yes, after William is declared dead, the company would have gone to Henry, but since Henry has no relatives remaining at the end of FNAF 6 at least, the IP of Freddy Fazbear and his friends would have gone to the state of Utah, which would have been sold or licensed to whoever bought it, because you know, they wanted to open the Mega Pizzaplex, which is a whole other question in and of itself, because like they ended up building it right where Afton needed it to be, so who really bought it? That's a question for another day. And unless Michael somehow had a kid of his own and then the state decided to give it to them, both of which are unlikely since it would have been Henry's company after that, or even if it didn't go to Henry 100%, Michael still didn't have any kids. The state would definitely be the ones who would own the franchise and would sell it to the highest bidder without a second thought, because let's be honest, literally any state would do that despite the amount of kids who have died in these restaurants. Also, fun fact, at the time he dies, Michael Afton is like 50 years old. Because assuming Michael is a teenager, or at least closer to it, in FNAF 4, that takes place in 1983, then FNAF 1 takes place in 1993, so at this point he would be at least 20, considering everything else. Then the place closes down and doesn't reopen for another 30 years until FNAF 3. So by FNAF 3, he is already 50. Michael is already 50 years old in FNAF 3, and then however long it takes for them to get to FNAF 6 after that. So Michael Afton is at least 50 years old, which is actually insane. So who knows how old William is? I don't want to know. But there you have it. Okay, that's how Freddy Fazbear's reopened so much, and that's how it's still around even after everyone associated with the company has died. Not everyone who remembers Henry should have really thought that one through, but what a wonderful world we live in, huh? If only Henry had named someone that he trusted as the CEO so that none of this could actually reopen or continue. Oh wait, that's right. You burned the one person who also wanted all of this to end and never happen again. All because you assumed that he wanted to die so that nobody would remember. Hey bozo! The parents of the victims remember, and a load of other people do too. It was kind of a big issue in your universe. So, Henry will forever and always be the dumbest character in FNAF history, and you can't change my mind on that, okay? Because no matter what stupid things William has done, at the very least he got away with it. He got the outcome he wanted. Henry's just dumb. And that's all the time we have for today, friends. Thank you all so much for watching. I have been Charmaine Connor Moreau, and I'll see you in another video unless Disney buys the license to my face and then puts me in the next Star Wars. It's a joke there for the Star Wars fans.
I won't fail you.
I guess you're not fans anymore, though. Whether or not you agree with me about Crying Child though, I think we can all agree how good Minecraft is. And if you're one of the 141 million active Minecraft players and enjoy scary things, which if you're here I'm sure you do, you should check out our newest channel, Minecraft Nightmare. A new top 10 channel that's Minecraft all the time. And if you like me and want more of the Cheese King in your life, which we should all strive for, I'll be over there too. And honestly, the whole Cheese King name actually came from when I was making my Minecraft account. So I'm super psyched for this channel. And if that channel can make it to 10,000 subscribers before the first video goes out, we'll have a very special live stream on this channel for all you loyal fans. Okay, now, let's do this. While I may have had prior bias to the idea that crying child is the vengeful spirit, aka the one you should not have killed, I really do want to get to the bottom of this, genuinely. So, when researching for Cassidy, I was keeping an open mind and using every source that I could. Multiple things stuck out to me as being commonly referred to as evidence for Cassidy. The final scene of Ultimate Custom Night where Golden Freddy is twitching after you beat 50-20 mode. The survival logbook, which seemingly contains conversations between Crying Child and Cassidy. The voice lines you can hear behind the mediocre melodies sound like a girl, like the ones that play slightly after the main mediocre melodies ones. And William actually killed Cassidy directly, as far as we can tell, whereas Michael put Crying Child in Fredbear's mouth. And these are some good points, and not something to discount. These are also the points that made me believe that Cassidy was the one you should not have killed originally as well. There's also the point that when the animatronics refer to the character as he, they're simply referring to the Golden Freddy animatronic, since Golden Freddy is a male character, as well as Cassidy's name containing the Cass prefix, which means curly-haired in Gaelic, and the character of Andrew, who represents the vengeful spirit in the Fazbear Fright story The Man in Room 1280, has curly black hair. There's also the two-eye theory from FNAF 3. The two-eye theory states that in the FNAF 3 bad ending, there are two eyes lit up in the head and the back, which we assume to be Golden Freddy to show that there are two souls inside the animatronic. I do have rebuttals for Crying Child points as well, alright, so don't worry, but I feel like it's important to not only talk about the evidence, but also give countering points to it as well. These are mostly coming from my brain, but after over 350 FNAF videos on my own, I feel like I am more than qualified to discuss this. The Golden Freddy final scene in Ultimate Custom Night can easily be explained away if you do believe the two souls theory, since if it was Crying Child in the suit as well, this would make sense. It could also be due to the fact that he was put in a coma by the Fredbear animatronic, which is a golden bear like Golden Freddy. The he pronoun being used to describe the vengeful spirit is a really hit to the Cassidy theory as well, since why would they be describing the gender of an animatronic when they're talking about the kid that died? Especially when, thanks to the mediocre melodies, we know that these animatronics are just saying the things that they're made to say by the one you should not have killed, meaning the spirit is really the one using these pronouns, so why wouldn't they use their own and instead use the animatronics? The voice lines sound like a girl because, well, they're voiced by a girl. The casting call on voices.com was very general and said that the actress could lean towards either a male or a female. The survival logbook having two spirits doesn't really have anything to do with Cassidy being a vengeful spirit, and the Cass prefix, while yes meaning curly-haired in Gaelic, seems to me like a bit of a stretch. The whole name of Cassidy is Irish in origin and means the clever one. The origin of this name is also 65% Irish and only 5% Gaelic, meaning if we want to go off meaning, we should be going with the majority, which would be the clever one, which really doesn't do anything to help this theory. And the two-eye theory has been debunked by us in the past in its own video and also on my Instagram in a reel. However, I'll go over it here. In an interview with Doco, Scott confirmed that while making FNAF 3, it was intended to be the finale, that there was no intended next game, meaning that at that point there were no other characters that could possess Golden Freddy. The lights being on in both eyes is simply because the light is bouncing off the inside of the head, and to show us that it actually is an animatronic head that was supposed to be Freddy, since if it was only one eye it could also kind of look like Bonnie. Or hell, if it's only one eye we would have thought that it was another Foxy. Now there is a lot more evidence for Crying Child in my opinion, okay? Whenever I asked others who thought that it was Cassidy why they thought it was Cassidy instead, they all ended up giving me the same points. That Cassidy was killed directly, the two souls theory, and the gender confusion of the animatronic. Typically, nothing additional was added, okay? I'm sorry, it's just how it went. So now let's go over some of the evidence I gathered for Crying Child's case. Cassidy was released in the Happiest Day minigame in FNAF 3, hence why the original animatronics don't appear in FNAF 6 when Henry is trying to put everything involving Fazbear Entertainment to rest. If Cassidy is at rest as well, she cannot be possessing William. The spirit possessing William also, from what we've seen in the games, cannot be possessing both him and the Golden Freddy animatronic. If he can possess multiple things, then the two souls theory helps explain that as well, despite two souls and multiple possessions coming out of seemingly nowhere as far as the games are concerned. As I said, the casting call also said whoever got the part could lean towards a male or a female voice. And considering how Tabitha Skeins, the actress who got the part, is female, it would make sense for her to lean towards a female voice. It's also worth noting that most prepubescent male characters have female voice actors. Danny Phantom, Timmy Turner, Ash Ketchum, all these characters have female voice actors because they're young, so the same would be the case for Crying Child. The appearance of the nightmare animatronics in FNAF 4 as well also seems to be impossible unless the one creating that situation, the vengeful spirit, had seen them before. And since FNAF 4 was a dream, as confirmed by Ultimate Custom Night in lines like "This is a nightmare you won't wake from," Crying Child is the only one to have seen these animatronics. Crying Child also dies in a hospital after suffering through the agony of his coma nightmare, which would give him the power to latch onto something nearby, which would have most likely been his father. There's also weaker evidence like the fact that the image used for the vengeful spirit is just a blown out image of Scott's son, which could be a parallel to William's son. Andrew from the Man in Room 1280 is also a male, and while yes, Michael put Crying Child's head into the robot, William was the one who made the robot and also made it powerful enough to crush a skull, whereas a normal animatronic would be unable to do so, which is what Michael assumed would happen. He didn't think that it was going to kill his brother. Something that MapHat also agrees with, if, like some commenters have said, they only care about what he says and not the actual evidence. And while there is more evidence for Crying Child, there are also some things that don't have clean answers. The same is true for Cassidy. Cassidy might not have been released in the Happiest Day minigame, despite it seemingly being the case. The Nightmare animatronics also do appear in FNAF VR, which could have been due to the scanning of the hard drive that created Glitchtrap, who had seen the nightmares at this point, but it doesn't explain the fact that Michael drew Nightmare Fredbear in the survival logbook, unless this is something that he drew beforehand and then showed to Crying Child, hence why they showed up in his dreams, but that involves assumptions that I'm just not comfortable making. Crying Child does die in a hospital. However, while we haven't really seen proof that you can possess something far away in the games, we also technically haven't seen proof that says you can't. In my personal opinion, the lack of evidence is in and of itself evidence against that, but I guess I can see why others wouldn't be so quick to accept that. The same idea with possessing multiple things. The whole image being of Scott's son thing is kind of weak, but considering that the FNAF 4 home was also decorated with images of his family, I'd actually like to think that this is more important than we realize. Because sure, using his own assets is cheaper than buying them, but this seems very deliberate. If the images in the FNAF 4 home were supposed to be of William and his family, and they were of Scott's family, and then Scott's son is used for something else, yeah. But people will hone in on how that is circumstantial. The biggest rebuttal for Crying Child, however, is that William didn't kill him, Michael did. And since Crying Child is William's son, he wouldn't want to torture his dad. And while this can be true, we have to remember that Crying Child is again also a child, who most likely saw his sister get scooped by Baby, who got scared when he saw his father putting a worker into the Fredbear suit, and one of Scott's hints from that live stream oh so long ago was what is seen in shadows is often misunderstood in the mind of a child. Even without seeing William give the superpower he needed to the animatronic in order to make it a killbot, Crying Child knows that William is making killbots. He knows that he made Baby, and he knows that William made Fredbear. So getting killed by the animatronic wouldn't necessarily be Michael's fault, it would be William's. Much like how Elizabeth's death was his fault as well. And being family doesn't mean that you can't dislike or even hate those people, okay? Being related to you doesn't automatically give people a free pass for doing horrific acts. If my father was a serial killer who killed my little sister, and then killed me using overpowered animatronics, you best believe I'm coming back with a vengeance. And also, just one final point in general, in that interview with Daco that is still available on Daco's channel, Scott said that FNAF 3 was intended to be the final game. This question is presented 21 minutes into the video if you want to actually look at the timecode, when asked about which ending of FNAF 3 is canon. However, Scott also refuses to answer that question, because he knows how passionate the community gets, and cites the argument over Mangle's gender as a reason why he won't answer it. He says that it's complicated. And to me, this sounds like it's because what people generally understand in this series would be countered by which ending is canon. The good ending would have released Cassidy's soul, which would in turn make it impossible for her to be the vengeful spirit, since that minigame was in fact not Crying Child, okay? He hadn't been introduced yet. And according to a recent community poll, which actually inspired this video, the generally accepted idea is that Cassidy is the vengeful spirit. So if he had countered that, everyone would have all been up in a tizzy, okay? This was also after Ultimate Custom Night had been released, so Yeah. Firstly, we have to establish whether this would be something new or if it would have been this way since the start. And there are a few indicators that might surprise you. In my latest playthrough, the security breach but it's ruined by mods video that released on Saturday, April 2nd on this channel, I made a note to point out that Freddy doesn't really seem to care when you get locked inside the Pizzaplex. He also seemed to care more about the fact that you got a crappy Mr. Hippo magnet as your free gift, and sounds more disappointed about that than the whole locked in and might get killed by a serial killer thing. Which begs the question, is he really all that disappointed? Obviously, if he was blatantly evil, he would have just turned us over to Vanessa, but if he was really crafty, he would gain our trust first. After all, he should have Glitch Trap's code inside him, right? Well, let's look at what he does before the doors close. He sends us to get a pass in order to free him from his green room, and then everything seems to go well. But then, for some random reason, without ever mentioning this before, he tells us that he senses we are broken and that he needs to bring us to medical so that we can get fixed up or something like that. Whether this was meant to be a nod to Crying Child or not doesn't matter in this case, okay? The point here is that it doesn't actually do anything. We get a run-in with Vanessa that later gets turned into a TikTok meme, but other than that, we stay the same. We don't get healed, we don't get a band-aid because we could have had it from the start. We get in that booth, instantly turn around and move the curtain to peep outside and watch that scene. After that, Freddy doesn't mention how we're still broken, and I don't know about you, but me standing in a booth isn't really gonna heal me, okay? It seems odd if you ask me, especially since now with that little pit stop, even if you go full steam ahead making no stops, sprinting the whole time, you can't make it out of the doors. That one little interaction is the 30 seconds that we needed in order to escape out the front doors, but thanks to Freddy, now we don't make it. And you can't use his programming as an excuse for this either, because if we want to use programming as evidence, this man was supposed to be controlled by Afton's virus, and the glitching out should have messed him up. Plus, his coding isn't designed to scan children that are literally inside his body. If he picked up on the injury when Gregory was outside of his stomach for the first time and he was scanning us, why not take him to medical instantly, or as soon as you got out of the green room? And again, why make it seem like your coding is letting you scan a kid that's inside you, when nobody should be in there? Unless that's the point. What if Afton's virus did grab a hold of Freddy and just made everything seem like it was fine? Having an animatronic protect you and gaining the kid's trust is a lot better than just nabbing him out of nowhere. Plus, I mean, there would have been plenty of times this kid could have been gotten, particularly when Freddy gets grabbed by the Moondrop animatronic right outside of Parts and Service. You're telling me that Moondrop, the daycare attendant, told Vanessa that Freddy was in the Parts and Service room, but didn't mention that we were in the recharge station right next to Parts and Service? I mean, he knew, like he waved at us while taking Freddy away. But Vanessa knows that just grabbing Gregory won't accomplish Afton's true goal. So instead, what do? They stage a fake interrogation where Freddy once again looks like the good guy, and then she leaves through the most inconvenient way for her possible. Why would she leave to Rockstar Row when she could easily come our way and then head to the main atrium? That's where Gregory was. That's where all the animatronics have been spotting him. And then, after Vanessa leaves Freddy in Parts and Service so that his casing can be put on a new endo after corporate gives the go-ahead, she doesn't seem to be suspicious that he's walking around Rockstar Row. Like, who would have repaired him if not Gregory? There is literally no other living human in the Pizzaplex at this point, and the whole containment cylinder thing is so that it protects humans on the outside. Why is Vanessa so nonchalant about Freddy walking around? It was something that confused me in my first playthrough. I figured that Vanessa would just pull us out of Freddy if we got too close, but no. And a reasonable explanation to that is that she isn't sus because she knows the plan. And also, it's worth noting that Afton has spent all this time in a burnt down Pizzaplex that also contained his daughter, who has pulled this exact same scheme on us prior to this game, okay? So he could have picked up on it from her, either while they were burning, while she was trying to impress him, or maybe if she is controlling the blob and it's not actually Funtime Freddy. Just saying. And maybe I'm wrong about that, okay? It's entirely possible. I mean, after all of this, it is a FNAF game, right? Where not everything makes sense for the sake of the story that Scott wants to tell. But what about the post-game? What about after we supposedly end Afton? What then? Is Freddy on the up and up? Or is there enough of Afton in there for us to be in danger? Well, it's actually a pretty interesting idea, since there is the distinct possibility that Afton is now controlling Freddy. Sure, when we haven't defeated Afton's body and he ends up possessing Freddy, we get killed instantly and Freddy gets purple eyes. However, in the actual ending to this boss fight, we supposedly stop Burn Trap. But then, the area around us starts collapsing. What if Afton was using Freddy as a means of escape when he knew that his situation was dire? I mean, honestly, if we think about this, Afton was downloading his consciousness wirelessly into Glamrock Freddy while we were fighting him. That was the whole point of the fight. But would it really reset to 0 once he stops and tries again? Or would it just be like pausing a download? Honestly, with the kind of buffoonery in this series, I don't think we can discount the possibility that Afton was simply just putting a pause on the download in an effort to eventually still take over Freddy and potentially spend time with his robot son. Or maybe just escape into the world once more. But like, seriously, he was transferring his consciousness into Glamrock Freddy by putting his hand on a monitor. And not even a monitor, like a dinosaur monitor at that. I don't think that we can like just go like, oh no, he's not in Freddy, he's dead, he's gone forever. That's no. If he can transfer his brain from an animatronic into another animatronic through touching a computer screen where he can see the guy, that's... No. If you think that Afton's done, you have not been paying attention to this series at all. And if you think that Glamrock Freddy is safe, again, you don't know the series in the slightest. I hate that I was right about Freddy, because eventually it's gonna be revealed that he's evil. I know it.
Part of the reason why I was initially suspicious of Gregory being a ghost was his very mysterious origin. The Pizzaplex seems to have no records of him and is unable to locate his parents or even any trace of him in the system, implying he somehow, I guess, snuck into the Pizzaplex, or perhaps he is a victim that never left. I know we get that ending where Gregory is sleeping in the streets homeless, but don't worry, I'll be talking about that too, and how I think that could actually play into my theory of Gregory being a ghost and possibly a victim of villainous and murderous animatronics. But more on that later. Getting back to those cookies, let's talk about them. Can you eat cookies or drink drinks if you're dead? Well, I personally do not think you can. The drinks and food wouldn't be able to be processed by your ghostly form, so it really wouldn't make sense for you to be able to. We've all seen what happens when someone like Slimer from Ghostbuster eats food. It kind of just goes right through him, and if anything, it turns into like slime or ectoplasm. You can't really like process it properly. It's pretty gross. Now, Gregory never seems to be compelled to eat, so we don't know for sure, but it also seems odd that you would be collecting so many tasty and limited edition drinks and food items without being able to eat them, which in this game, for some reason, you just can't do that. It's especially weird actually because when you play in Help Wanted, you can eat things, and that's like a VR game, so I don't understand how that all works. And throughout the course of the evening, Gregory doesn't even express that he is hungry, and that is a long time and a lot of running around to do and not to be hungry from. If you're alive, that is. Which, like I said, I really think this is more evidence that Gregory may no longer be considered as such. Spirits don't really have a need to get hungry as they don't have proper bods, so they don't need to like fuel them. They're just ghosty ghosts. They don't have physical forms, you know? Aside from not being able to eat, you also don't seem to feel much of any normal human pains. Gregory gets tired periodically from prolonged running and crawling in terms of his stamina bar, but he doesn't actually express getting tired in terms of like being sleepy. He's never like, oh my gosh, I'm like so tired. Okay, so like maybe when Moondrop is coming around trying to make you sleepy, but I don't know, that's some weird stuff. That's a thing that every time I talk about it, I'm like, I don't even know if this should be in this game. Considering how late Gregory is staying up for a normal human child, it's pretty odd that he doesn't ever express being like tired from staying up too late. Of course, if you're a robot, then the normal everyday pains experienced in human life wouldn't affect you. You don't need to sleep, so why would you get tired? Which, you know, he could also be an animatronic. Sure, we see him trying to sleep in an alley in one of the endings, but we don't actually hear him express feeling tired or ever see him fully asleep. So I'm thinking either animatronic or ghosty ghost. Take your pick. We're focusing on ghosts though in this theory, so let's get back to that. Right at the beginning of this game, I was pretty suspicious of Gregory when it came to him being a real living kid. Something was weird about him. I don't know, there's something off about Gregory. I just look at him and I'm like, I don't know, what's up with you? Are you real? Are you a real boy? Right at the beginning, he generally just seemed to be too big to actually fit into Freddy's stomach cavity. Especially when you learn, at least initially, there was also a Fazwatch dispenser in there somehow. I know these stomachs are in theory possibly based off of Williams' designs, which were about capturing kids, or at least seemed to be from his sinister perspective. But in this game, even Glamrock Freddy seems to think Gregory moving around inside of him is dangerous, as that is an area that is really only meant to be large enough for moving things like birthday cakes and piñatas. I imagine even the piñatas would actually have to be really small though, because that cavity does not look big enough for a piñata to me. Also, I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever seen a birthday cake for a kid's party that was large enough to be considered the size of a small child. Like, how big would that cake have to be for this to work? Like, he's have to be carrying around giant cakes in his stomach. Also, am I just not eating large enough cakes? Is that what is happening here? Am I missing out? Are people giving me tiny little like dinky cakes for my birthday? If that's the reality though, if I'm not just like getting tiny cakes and people are ripping me off on my birthday, I'm gonna be real sad. Even when I make cakes though, I don't make them that big. Let me know your thoughts about cake sizes down in the comments below, and let me know how big the biggest birthday cake you've ever seen or made in person was. Maybe there's something I'm missing out on here. Maybe I'm just not making or eating large enough cakes. Sweet, ginormous birthday cakes. Where are you? Another thing that seems odd is you never really wear the clothes that you collect. At least not as far as we can tell or see. Now, they might increase your stats to just have them like in your inventory, but as far as we know, Gregory never puts those items on. Is this because he always has to remain in the outfit that he died in? Because, you know, he's a freaking ghost? Perhaps the only clothes he can wear are the ones he's already wearing. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, but then what about the Fazwatch? Well, the Fazwatch could still be an item that Gregory could have equipped because it doesn't actually interfere with the ethereal clothes that he's already wearing. After all, the Fazwatch is more of an accessory really than like an outfit choice. Also, if my theory is right and he is a spooktacular spirit, it's also very likely that he's like a poltergeist who can interact with and hold objects in the real world, like the flashlight, the laser blaster, his Fazwatch, and other such items that he is able to use. Though even then, you don't typically see poltergeists put on physical clothing for some reason. Ghosts might be able to change their appearance, but usually not by physically dressing up. Like a sheet. I think that's the most I've ever seen ghosts wear. I feel like in Beetlejuice they wear sheets at one point, right? They're trying to scare everybody. But that's one piece. I feel like if you had to like have pants and like a shirt and shoes and socks and all that stuff, that's like a lot of clothing for you to have to like maintain a physical form to wear it. So I think it's just too much work for a ghost? I don't know. I would propose when it came to Gregory being a ghost at the Pizzaplex that he was a victim who went missing there. Perhaps that's why there are no records of him, because Afton had them wiped clean. I imagine he would find a way to do that for all of his victims here so that he could preserve his hunting ground. It also seems odd that Gregory has no relatives to speak of. The game leads us to believe this is because Gregory is homeless, and even possibly suggests that he or someone at least may have been living in the Pizzaplex prior to the events of Security Breach, with hidden alcoves where it looks like someone has been kind of like squatting and living. And with one of the endings showing Gregory living in a gutter, huddling under a newspaper for warmth. Is it also possible that Gregory would always be cold if he was a ghost? So could his seeking warmth in that ending also be a hint that he's no longer of this world? That might be a bit of a stretch, but it's still something to consider at least. I mean, ghosts are usually very cold. That's, you know, they say when a ghost passes through you feel like a chill. So I'm just saying it could be a connection. I know I'm stretching, but just come with me on this ghostly journey. Please, come with me. It'll be fun. Despite the fact that Security Breach which seems to want us to think that Gregory is homeless, it's also possible that he simply can't remember his home. After all, for being homeless, he looks relatively well kept and well dressed. And who gave him that band-aid on his cheek, or where did he get it from if he doesn't have literally anyone around to look after him? Did he run away from home? Or is it that Gregory no longer remembers his home because his life was taken from him during a visit to the Pizzaplex and now he basically haunts it, his soul trapped due to his unsolved murder and the traumatic nature of his death? Perhaps this experience was so traumatic that he doesn't even remember that he's dead, which is why he doesn't even try to communicate it to Freddy or even really reflect on it himself while alone. I think if he is a ghost, he doesn't really fully understand that himself. This could also imply why the real and true ending for this game has to be in defeating William Afton, aka Burn Trap. It could be that this is Gregory's unfinished business, and the ending we get if Vanny is redeemed with Vanessa, Freddy, and Gregory on the hill is actually symbolizing that they have all crossed over and now get to be together and at peace. After all, that whole like hill with the tree and everything, it definitely reminds me of the gravestones that we've seen before in FNAF, so to me it feels very like ghost vibes, in my opinion. Of course, one theory we've been discussing on Top 10 Gaming for a while since before the release of Security Breach is that Gregory could actually be Crying Child. If so, this also kind of fits with our ghost theory. I mean, sure, Crying Child could be an animatronic replacement child who was like created after the original Crying Child's death. Gregory could be a lifelike animatronic as such, but it's also possible that Gregory, if he is a ghost, is actually the spirit of Crying Child, because although we have theories about where that spirit is, we've never really like fully gotten any confirmation on those theories, I don't think. They're still kind of theories. Perhaps that is why he is so closely tied to the Pizzaplex, which was also built on top of the Freddy's location we manage in FNAF 6, Pizzeria Simulator, where it's believed all the souls were gathered as part of Henry's plot to finally defeat Afton and then set all his victims' souls free. And if you still aren't sure if Gregory is Crying Child or not, that's fine. I still say they have lots of similarities, but Gregory doesn't need to be Crying Child for him to also be a ghost. It just seems like another theoretical connection that supports the ghost theory that we're discussing here.